You step into the cool dusk of St. George's Chapel in Windsor, where polished stone walls absorb the hush like a sponge. Your footsteps echo in the vast nave, and you sense the weight of centuries pressing inward. A single torch guttering casts long wavering shadows across the tombs lining the aisles. Mainstream fact: Henry VIII was interred on February 15, 1547, beside his beloved Jane Seymour in the choir of this chapel, his coffin bearing the royal arms in brass and gilt. You catch the faint scrape of metal as a sentinel adjusts his halberd, the only sound beside your steady breath proof that even in regal silence, someone's always on guard. You approach the king's monument, a marble effigy carved with serene negligence. Henry sleeps with folded hands, his crown tipped at a jaunty angle. Historians still argue whether the sculptor deliberately muted the king's ferocity to emphasize piety over power. You lean closer and trace the chipped nose rumor claims a zealous Puritan once took a hammer to the effigy in protest. Fringe. Lore insists the same zealot absconded with a fragment of marble, hoping to harness a sliver of Tudor might for his Sunday sermons. You smirk at the thought that you're standing amid chipped pride and stolen stone. A cold draft drifts across the tomb, carrying with it the faint aroma of incense from an evening vespers service, an olfactory reminder that faith lingers where flesh has faded. You peer behind the alabaster slab and find a small carved heart on a shield, dedicated to the chaplain who anointed the king at death's door. Jesters aside, if hearts had opinions, his would have voted for a spa day instead of all those last rites. Your gaze shifts to the inscription in Latin: Hic iacet Henricus Octavus, Rex Angli, Filius Henrici Septimi, Pater Edwardi. You roughly translate it in your head. Here lies Henry VIII, King of England, son of Henry VII, father of Edward. It reads like a brutal pedigree, each title a bookmark between kernel and casualty. You swallow, recalling the bloodlines he severed and the heirs he engineered, only to watch them stumble through court intrigues after his final breath. You recall that puppy bequest Henry's spaniel left to his fool, Will Summers. Look around. No playful hound is sniffing your ankles here, only solemn pews and polished floors. That dog's inheritance is probably buried under yew roots by now, but in its simplicity, it outlives dynasties. His foolish gift sparks a rogue smile. You imagine a spectral pup padding through the chapel, sniffing at ghostly robes, forever chasing a game that never ends. In the dim light, you notice two empty niches flanking the tomb intended for Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, his executed wives. Their absence is a mournful joke, marble spaces forever unfilled, as if the architects forgot they too were part of the royal ensemble. Scholars still argue whether the blank niches were deliberate symbols of his tumultuous marriages or simply budget cuts by a penny-pinching treasurer. Either way, the emptiness speaks volumes. You kneel at the foot of the monument, touching the cool stone with your fingertips. A bench offers a place to rest, and you slide onto it, letting your shoulders slump. Above, painted angels hold scrolls proclaiming Christus regnat, Christ reigns, standing watch while the king's likeness endures in sleeping marble. You wonder if those angels ever feel guilty for outlasting their charge. Footsteps shuffle past you, pilgrims, historians, and curious onlookers seeking the brush with the Tudor legend. Some leave coins on the ledge. Others pause to scribble prayers in battered notebooks. A lone antiquarian jots notes about the tomb's missing knight effigies, planning a lecture on Tudor mortuary politics because evidently death is the greatest conference topic in ecclesiastical circles. You rise and circle the tomb, tracing the carved roses of England and the fleur-de-lis of France. The double arms remind you of his grandiose claim to half a continent, a banner torn down by treaties and treaties torn down by new alliances. You recall the jousting tilt that birthed his ulcer and set these regal final days into motion. Call back. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen. This marble won't save you from decay, but it might shield you from remembering how it all began. A strange hush falls as a cathedral bell tolls in the distance. The single note reverberates through your bones, marking another hour of history's pulse. Shadows deepen. The torchlight flickers. You realize that Henry's final act lying in quiet repose beneath those ornate ribs of stone remains one of the strangest epilogues a king could claim. You step away, heart heavy with the gravity of legacy, yet oddly lightened by the unsettling calm settling over the chapel. The corridors beyond are empty now, bereft of scheming and ritual. You glimpse a final torch sputter out, and with it, the last living link to that fevered night when a monarch's body and faith both unraveled. You settle onto a low stone bench in the chapel's quiet corner, letting the soft hush envelop you like a worn velvet cloak. Your breathing slows, each exhale a gentle surrender to the stillness around you. Soft echoes of distant prayers drift from the altar, curling around the pillars as if offering a lullaby to weary souls. In this calm, memories of fevered bodies and plotting courtiers fade into gentle ripples of reflection. The cold marble no longer feels austere but comforting, a steadfast companion through time's ceaseless flow. Shadows lengthen without fear, each one a silent sentinel guarding the past. You rest your palm against the smooth stone, imagining the warmth that once pulsed beneath it, and feel a tender kinship with every life that passed these halls. Outside, twilight gathers beyond stained glass, painting the floor in muted jewels. The hush deepens, yet it is not empty, it breathes. With centuries of voices hushed in reverence, you allow your thoughts to drift, carried on the hushed current of history, as the chapel offers its final benediction, that even the mightiest fall to silence, and in that quiet, find their true peace. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and the torchlight dims to a whispered glow, you feel a calm settling deep within you. The cold stone and ancient prayers cradle your thoughts, guiding you toward rest. In the hush of Windsor's twilight, you are reminded that all journeys, regal or humble, end in the same gentle embrace of night. You slip back into the muted glow of flickering tapers in the death chamber, where the scent of myrrh mingles with the copper notes of stained linens. You probably won't survive this final ceremony either, but hey, that's part of the fun. At the foot of the bed, Bishop Stephen Gardiner, his cope heavy with gold threads, murmurs prayers while pressing a cold silver-bound missal into the king's trembling hands. Mainstream fact: Henry received his extreme unction and communion from Gardiner on January 28, 1547, marking his official entry into the liturgy of the dying. You watch Henry's cracked lips form hesitant words of confession, the king whispering sins as painfully familiar as old scars. A chalice carved from purported unicorn horn glints on a velvet cushion, a fringe claim among courtiers, insisting its legendary purity would cleanse even regicidal ink. Historians still argue whether Henry intended this ritual to reaffirm his break from Rome or simply to placate Catholic traditionalists. As the priest sprinkles holy oil on the king's forehead, the flame of each candle trembles as though an empathy dotted a small walnut table nearby. Catherine Parr stands aside, her lavender gown a soft counterpoint to the harsh tapestries overhead. She leans close to Edward Seymour and John Dudley, voices low but urgent as they consult a parchment bearing the king's last will. You edge forward, hearing Catherine breathe the words that will shape dynasties. "I appoint my son Edward my protector," the queen recites, "and command that no counselor act without my consent." Each signature is a whisper, an echo more powerful than any trumpet blast. Scribes dip goose quills into Spanish ink, their tips scratching parchment with precise authority. You follow one scribe's hand as it pauses over a clause about Mary's estate and Elizabeth's guardianship, the text teetering between promise and political gambit. A single drop of ink flitters onto the tablecloth, dark as a sin unconfessed. Slowly, the king nods, summoning strength for one more gesture, pressing his signet ring into crimson wax. You watch the impression bloom like an ominous blossom. Beyond the heavy velvet curtains, muffled voices argue over the order of succession, but here, time feels suspended. A chamber pot clinks as a servant hurriedly withdraws, reminder that even in sacred moments, the body's demands remain insistent. The king grips the edge of his mattress, bones creaking in protest, and you feel the air shift as the council's authority seeps through the tapestry of ritual. A hush descends as the final rites near completion. Gardner intones the concluding prayer, his voice echoing off stone walls. Henry's eyes flutter, gaze lost between heaven and the rough-hewn ceiling. A single tear tracks down his cheek, a king's last concession to mortality. You imagine that tear carrying the guilt of broken marriages, severed friendships, and a kingdom reborn in blood and ink. Catherine Parr steps forward, smoothing the king's hand as she reads aloud a private clause gifting his beloved spaniel to his fool, Will Somers. A faint smile ghosts Henry's lips, recalling laughter amid carnage. The room exhales as though released from a spell. Jesters aside, nothing unites court life like the promise of a dog's inheritance. You linger as the bishop closes the missal with a thud that reverberates in your chest. The council gathers the sealed documents, folding them into velvet pouches bound by crimson cords. Swords hang silent on the walls, spectators to this gentle usurpation. The ritual is complete, but the weight of what's been written presses on the chamber like a storm cloud. With a final blessing, Gardner retreats and Catherine Parr gathers the nobles, their faces ashen in candlelight. You slip toward the door, each step muffled by the thick carpet, heart pounding with the solemnity of vows transcribed in whispered ink. In the corridor beyond, the world breathes anew, unaware that life within these walls has irrevocably shifted, carved not by sword or decree, but by the delicate dance of ritual and will. You slip from the velvet-shrouded gallery into a narrow passage lined with stained glass windows, where pale dawn light fractures into rainbow shards across cold flagstones. The murmur of distant Latin chants drifts from the chapel, mingling with the rasp of quills on parchment. You probably won't survive this theological wrestling match, but hey, that's part of the fun. Before you can steady your breath, a choir boy scuttles past, his surplice brushing against your arm, scattering stray notes of Gregorian chant like breadcrumbs. Mainstream historical fact: in 1539, Henry VIII enforced the Act of 6 Articles, reaffirming core Catholic doctrines, transubstantiation, clerical celibacy, and confession, while declaring himself supreme head of the Church of England. Talk about mixing business with pleasure, right? You duck into a vaulted antechamber where rival divines' robes, distinctly cut for conservative and reformist leanings, huddle in tight clusters. On one side, staunch traditionalists clutch rosary beads and mumble about papal reverence. On the other, reform-minded clerics finger brittle pamphlets railing against popish abuses. Fringe whisper: some insist Henry consulted his royal astrologer to choose the most auspicious day to recant his Protestant sympathies, because who doesn't want cosmic approval before a public flip-flop? Historians still argue whether those star charts ever move the king's moods or just line some astrologers' pockets. You perch on a low wooden bench, the polished oak cool beneath your fingertips. A thin stream of incense smoke curls around your head, carrying the faint aroma of frankincense and maybe a hint of burnt parchment from overheated scrolls. A radical preacher paces before a hastily constructed pulpit, delivering a sermon so fiery it could scorch the tapestry behind him. Faith without works is dead, he bellows, and you can practically feel the recoil of every unbeliever in the next county. But then a bishop robes trimmed in fur and gold rises to counter, voice silky as swan down. He argues for the sacrament's sanctity with such measured calm you half expect honking geese to waddle in behind him, testing your composure. Spoiler: no geese. Though one cleric coughs so violently, you glance at his sputum-stained cassock in horror. You shift your weight as two scribes whisper to each other, inkpots perilously balanced on a narrow ledge. One rumor says they swapped ink for crushed beetles in a prank to see who'd notice the magenta sermon notes at tomorrow's council. Talk about making Mass a little more colorful literally. Your heart thuds as the door swings open to admit the king's chaplain, a man with a hawkish nose and eyes like chipped flint. He carries a silver-bound Bible and a stack of royal edicts, all stamped with the king's personal seal. You catch the glint of candlelight on paper and wonder if those documents contain another doctrinal volte-face, because Henry loved his theological U-turns more than a jouster loves his tilt. You remember that fateful jousting tilt and the subsequent ulcer. Well, here you witness a different kind of puncture, one through the heart of religious unity. The chaplain begins reading aloud Henry's own words, rescinding recent concessions to Protestant preachers, insisting on uniformity of worship. A hush falls so deep you hear a monk's rattling cough echo like distant thunder. One priest, whose hat looks as though it was stitched by an overeager squirrel, frowns and stages a quiet protest, slipping a note to a nearby canon. The note reads, "Act of 6 Articles is as welcome as rain in a crowded church." Modern aside, that's like hating on free Wi-Fi, isn't it? The canon stubs out his candle with surprising force, sending sparks skittering across the stone floor. Amid the hush, a soft voice hums. It's Catherine Parr, reciting a psalm under her breath as she glides past. You inhale deeply, catching the faintest vestige of lavender, again her signature scent, and for a moment you almost forget the severity of these doctrinal showdowns. But the scent is nakedly real, a reminder that faith can be as comforting as it is divisive. A runaway sunbeam breaks through the window, illuminating dust motes like golden fireflies. You wish you could bottle that light as a cure for gloom better than any crocodile dung concoction. Call back, remember that sunscreen? Yet the brightness highlights the strained faces of the convened bishops. Some nod along solemnly. Others exchange sidelong glances, as though charting alliances by the hue of each rival's mitre. Outside, the bells of Westminster toll for vespers, their deep clangs rolling like distant cannon fire. You peer through a narrow slit and glimpse the river below, where barges wait to bear this week's dissenters to the tower, or perhaps to the pyre. Fringe tailies claim one reformist preacher smuggled poison in his drink after the last convocation. No one's sure if he actually attempted regicide, or merely wanted to test the royal stomach. Historians still argue whether he was a martyr or a malcontent. A sudden gust rattles the window, extinguishing half the candles in the chamber and plunging you into flickering shadows. Voices sharpen. Someone rails that Edward Seymour's faction plans to push a Protestant heir onto the throne. Another insists Mary Tudor will avenge papal authority with spiked chalices and singing nuns in every parish church. It's enough to give you whiplash or a serious case of devotional vertigo. You stand, shoulders aching, as a slender canon wheels out a lectern piled high with leather-bound acts of Parliament. He reads an amendment. Every clergy member must swear fealty to royal supremacy under penalty of praemunire, basically exile or worse. Friendly note, praemunire does not include first-class lodging. A chorus of dutiful amens rattles the rafters like musket fire. In the hush that follows, you sense the kingdom's religious heart being sutured and reopened in the same breath, as Henry's final theological pronouncements carve new fault lines across the realm. You shiver. It's a chill not born of cobblestones or dawn mists, but of spiritual fracture. You edge back toward the corridor, mind spinning with doctrinal edicts and whispered denunciations. The air seems heavier here, thick with sacred oil and second-hand sermons. You realize that just as Henry's body is unraveling upstairs, so too is the soul of his nation being stitched into an unfamiliar garment, one that may fit some courtiers snugly, but leaves others cold and exposed. As you step into the pale morning light outside the chapel door, you feel the weight of every whispered prayer and every harsh decree pressing on your shoulders. And you know that once Henry's last theological twist is done, the kingdom will be left to live or die by the shape it takes in his absence. You drift from the deathbed chamber into the hush of the anteroom, where shadows stretch like long, plotting fingers across tapestries depicting Henry's victories. Courtiers slink through corridors as if the walls themselves whisper secrets. After all, nothing stains linen more elegantly than a betrayal. You probably won't survive this political fever either, but hey, that's part of the fun. A hush falls when you enter. Half the room peers toward you, half towards the king's bed, and a few opportunists peek at both just in case. Mainstream. Historical fact. Henry established the Regency Council to govern if he died, packing it with men he trusted or thought he could bribe, like Bishop Stephen Gardiner and the reform-minded Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Jesters aside, it's like drafting a group project team where everyone hopes you fail, so they can claim your A+ for themselves. You lean against a gilded oak table, its surface slick with spilled ink from hastily signed documents. The air hums with quiet scheming. On one side, Gardiner's cohorts, faces as stern as carved gargoyles, clutch leather-bound statutes insisting on a Catholic succession. On the other, Cranmer's allies murmur about true faith and royal supremacy, ironically, debating religious freedom while plotting to imprison dissenters. Historians still argue whether Gardiner ever intended to betray Henry outright, or simply outmaneuver Cranmer in some scholarly debate over transubstantiation. Across the floor, you catch a glint of armor as the Duke of Norfolk strides through, his massive frame casting a long shadow that practically swallows lesser nobles whole. Rumor insists he once rode through London disguised as a commoner to test pub bread quality, not to foment dissent, but you wonder at the reliability of that tale. Fringe whispers claim Norfolk consulted a goatherd oracle, seeking guarantees of favor, because nothing says High Lord like a prophecy about spilled milk and stolen livestock. A sudden gasp echoes when a footman nearly spills a tray of wafers meant for final communion. The golden discs clatter on the marble, like tiny suns splintering across polished floors. You bend to help gather them, noting the sacred host glittering dully holy both to the reformers and conservatives. It's strange to see faith reduced to cold metal and ink, yet here you are, gathering crumbs of salvation. Beneath the watchful glare of painted saints, your palm brushes a sealed letter bound with the king's cipher stamp. It's addressed to Lady Mary, begging forgiveness for their past quarrels and promising lands to secure her loyalty. You swallow this as Henry, the man who wrote Defender of the Faith across his chest only to tear out every papal line when it suited him. Callback time. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, these inked seals might just be the stinkiest salve for royal wounds. Beyond the windows, the Thames glistens under a waning moon. You half expect lantern-lit barges to row upriver with traders on board, but the river is strangely calm, like a serpent's back before it strikes. Paranoid whispers drift your way. I saw Cranmer slip a dagger into careless Norfolk's pocket, one noble hisses, to ensure our dear Archbishop inherits the palace keys. You smirk, if only dagger diplomacy counted toward Renaissance chivalry trophies. As you step into the dim gallery, tapestries depicting Henry's jousts loom overhead. One scene shows him unhorsing a French knight, the very injury that birthed his fatal ulcer. You trace the fated threads with your finger, wincing at the thought that a single tilt of a lance changed the fate of an empire. That moment echoes here, in these power plays where each faction jockeys for battlefield supremacy of another kind. Your eyes flick to the corner, where the king's physician, Dr. Gilbert, condescends to explain the latest council alterations. To a nervous earl, you catch a bizarre glint in Gilbert's eye, half doctor, half spin doctor. Fringe gossip claims he sold phony phoenix tears to gullible nobles, promising immortality with each drop. You grin. Nothing spices up court life like snake oil sales and barely masked extortion. A sudden stifled laugh escapes you, recalling how Henry once joked that he'd outlive every wife because he married quickly, then promptly outlived 3 of them. Tonight, those jokes feel brittle, like broken pike shafts snapping under stress. You slip behind a carved pillar as the Cardinal Regent, Archbishop Thomas Wriothesley, strides in. His eyes flick from Lord Paget's trembling cough to Sir William Paget's smarmy grin. Both Pagets, by the way, father and son, the original dynasty of name confusion. Wriothesley's voice is soft but sharp, like a cat's velvet paw sinking into flesh. He announces a new clause in Henry's will. The king demands the heir be tutored exclusively by his choice of regent. The room tightens. You hold your breath, feeling the regent's gaze sweep the chamber, claiming silent territory. This is power theater at its finest. No cheering crowds, just repressed gasps and the muted scuffle of velvet shoes. Outside the gallery, a chamber pot clatters, followed by a curse so colorful it would shame a poet. You wonder whose dignity just tumbled down the privy shaft and what secrets it held. In the privacy of flush toilets, the lowest servant sometimes overheard the highest conspirator, then played both sides like a lute. The Palace Gossip Network, truly more reliable than any pigeon post. The night deepens. Through an open window, you glimpse the great bell of Greenwich toll once, twice each knell marking another hour closer to Henry's death. Courtiers glance at their sundials, count heartbeats, and recalculate alliances on the fly. You shrug nothing like imminent mortality to sharpen political appetites. Just before you slip away, someone whispers your name. It's Lady Catherine Parr, the Queen Regent, glancing around with a cool smile. She passes by without a word, but leaves behind a swirl of lavender-scented fan breeze. Some say she acts regent to secure her own future. Others claim genuine concern for the realm. Historians still argue whether Catherine's influence truly curtailed factional violence or merely delayed the banquet until after Henry's funeral. You close your eyes, inhaling that lavender, trying to mask the stench of sweating nobles and rotten ambition. A single light burns in a distant turret. You imagine Henry's ghost drifting through these halls, watching every handshake like a hawk spotting a rabbit. In a few hours, this court will fracture and reform around a new axis. Mary's Spanish devotion, Elizabeth's cautious pragmatism, Edward's Protestant tutors. But for now, you stand at the epicenter of everything collapsing and everything rising in its wake. You step into the corridor, footsteps soft against flagstones, heart still pounding with adrenaline. The quiet scheming continues behind you like a dark melody. You take one last look at the gallery doors, picturing them swung wide to admit both the final will and final breaths. This is the hour when swords remain sheathed but words cut deeper than any blade, and you realize, amid fevered flush and festering sores, the deadliest wound to Henry's kingdom isn't on his body, it's in the poisoned minds that surround his bed. Hey guys, tonight we stand beside a flickering hearth in the cold, stone-dampened walls of Greenwich Palace, where you taste the copper tang of death on the stale air. You hear the distant groan of tormented flesh as Henry's invalid court pages shuffle through corridors slick with candle drips. You probably won't survive this creeping fever, but hey, that's part of the fun. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we know who's as sleepless as you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You edge closer to the rust-iron bed that groans under the weight of a gaunt, sweating figure. His once broad shoulders now slump as though he's carrying the whole kingdom's misery on his spine. The air quivers with heat, an endless clammy embrace that sticks your nightshirt to your skin. A handful of silver-haired servants hover at the footboard, their eyes glazed with pity and terror. You can almost taste their prayers, whispered so fervently they drip from cracked lips. The source of this suffering? That jagged, mottled ulcer at his thigh, the remnant of a jousting accident from 1536 that cost Henry a battle and nearly his life. The wound, kept open to drain the poison, has festered for years, oozing bile yellow fluid onto embroidered linens. Mainstream medical fact. Victorian doctors later called it erysipelas, but Tudor surgeons knew it only as the king's curse. Jester's joke. At least no one's stealing his leg now, right? You press your face closer, noting the curious sheen of that ooze-like diluted cider, and wonder what odd salve they've smeared on it today. A fringe rumor insists it's unicorn horn powder. Another whispers of crocodile dung sunscreen, because medieval beauty rituals never played by modern rules. Historians still argue whether his chronic ulcers were exacerbated by syphilis or mere gangrene, and you feel the weight of that mystery settling in your bones. His breath rattles like a millstone grinding through gravel. Each exhale sends ripples through the linen canopy overhead. The king's chest heaves in desperate spasms, as though invisible hands are twisting his ribs. You swallow hard. This is Henry VIII, the man who once danced at his own divorce party, now gasping like a fish, stranded on a muddy riverbank. You might crack a grin at the cosmic irony, but your lips stick dry against your teeth. A court physician leans in, murmuring Latin prayers as he applies yet another foul-smelling poultice. Around you, the candles gutter and sparks drift toward the rafters. A slave boy scrambles to snuff the flames before the thatch ignites, and you wonder if fire or fever will take the king first. A soft snore escapes Henry's cracked lips, but it's no comfort. His slumber is laced with delirium, and his dreams are said to be haunted by the ghosts of wives he's outlived. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, tonight you'd trade it for something simple like a pillow that didn't feel like a slab of marble against your aching skull. The smell of stale wine and spilled ale hangs in the air, remnants of his persistent craving for claret, even as his stomach turned to sand. It said he once tipped the scales at over 400 pounds, but between gout, obesity, and these festering sores, he's a shell of gluttonous legend. By now, his skin has puckered and cracked, revealing angry veins like blackberry vines overtaking a garden wall. You watch the court ladies exchange sickly glances. Some dab at their handkerchiefs, others avert their eyes as though the sight might curse them too. Jokingly, you note that the only thing royal surgeons love more than gold is a corpse with a vivid infection, but you force yourself to draw breath anyway. Here, in this chamber of agony, you witness the unmasking of sovereignty. No crown glitters, no trumpets herald his arrival, only the raw, unfiltered spectacle of a body in revolt against life itself. You linger at his bedside, heart thudding as the weight of mortality presses down. The once formidable monarch who shattered alliances and severed heads with a flick of his wrist lies weak and broken, and you, wide-eyed and uneasy, realize that even kings cannot outpace decay.